Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the martial arts and everything else they're involved in. My guest today is an author, lecturer, former world champion athlete, university coach, martial arts instructor, and college professor. He was born in Los Angeles and at a young age was very active with interest not only spanning martial arts, but modern dance, trampoline, tumbling, and gymnastics. During his freshman year at UC Berkeley, he won the 1964 Trampoline World Championships in London and the NCAA Championship in vaulting, and in 1966 won the USGF Championship in floor exercise. He went on to become a successful coach and brought the Stanford Gymnastics team to national prominence. He lives in Brooklyn, New York with his wife, Joy. They have 3 grown daughters and 5 grandchildren, and you've heard quite a few of my guests mention him and his books on my show over the years, especially the book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Dan Millman. How you doing today, sir?
Hi, Brian. Doing very well. Thank you.
Hey, well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I realize how busy people's lives are, and I truly, truly appreciate when they take the time to come on the show and talk about this stuff. So seriously, thank you very much.
I'm always delighted to talk about martial arts.
Cool. Well, yeah. What I like to do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to know where that first interest came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
Well, there are actually 2 currents in my life. Okay. One, my idol, a kid who was streetwise. I was only about 5 years old, and he was streetwise. He was probably 8 years old, and his name was Steve Usa, Y-U-S-A. And Steve taught me to throw a football, and we used to have these dirt ball fights in the neighborhood. It was a time in the 50s, so things were looser. You know, My mother would let me go all day, and then she'd yell dinner time, and I'd come home when it was turning dark. But Steve introduced me in a way through our friendship and his mentorship to Japanese culture. So there was, and I saw paintings in their house. I didn't know were Zen paintings or images of geisha dolls. And only later was I drawn into Zen and various kinds of Zazen meditation from Asia in general. And I've somehow connected more to Japanese culture than the wonderful depth culture of China, for example. But that was one current. So an early interest in resonance, and who knows, past lives, I don't know, but a connection with Japan. And actually, I was small. My mom loved to work out in the world. And so as soon as she could get me in preschool, she got me in. I was always the youngest in my class in school, and I was physically smaller. So as probably many of your other guests might have mentioned, I tended to get bullied sometimes. And so that was the second current that drew my interest in learning to defend myself. And in our neighborhood, they cleared away a little forest where the kids used to play and built a Japanese cultural center.
Oh, wow.
And the opening day, they had festivals, and they showed flower arranging and different Zen arts, dance, music, and they had a judo exhibition.
Nice.
And I was so thrilled seeing these people, these kids throw big adults. I said, I want to do that. So judo was my first real martial art. I mean, my dad took me to a boxing class, but I decided fairly quickly I didn't like hitting people or getting hit. So as a young boy, about 8, 9 years old, I decided I gravitated toward judo. And there was a wonderful man there. I think anybody interested or who knows martial arts knows the name Gene LaBelle.
Oh, yes. Wow.
And Gene, I just knew him as this big red-haired guy who would let us little kids throw him. And he'd have to kind of prearrange his fall so we wouldn't throw him on top of anybody because we weren't that skilled. But so that was again the connection to Japan. It was there were almost all Japanese students there, and just little me. And I learned to roll and to fall, and so that I was actually drawn into martial arts well before gymnastics.
Wow.
I did judo for maybe a year. Learned to good at. I was a wiry kid, so learned to fall and do all that. And your audience probably is quite familiar with all that stuff.
Hmm.
What I like about judo is you're working with, in general, non-compliant partners. So you do learn some elements of self-defense where arts that like Aikido, which I later got a shodan in Aikido. So now if I'm ever attacked on the street, I can whip out my certificate, uh, but Aikido, you work with compliant partners. People are flowing with you. You learn to blend. It's a great philosophy of life, but it's less preparation, in my view, anyway, in my experience, for actual street combat and practical self-defense, other than getting out of the way and that sort of thing. But the judo, you work with non-compliant partners, some in tournaments and so on. They're trying to throw you down, and you're trying to throw them down. And so it was a good start. And later, after my first tournament, I tried tomoe nage, which a wheel throw where you put your foot on someone's stomach, roll back, and throw them over your head. And it looks good for the movies. But the kid fell on top of me and took me down and pinned me. And that was, in a sense, I moved on from there. I got busy in school. And eventually I took basically some karate.
Okay.
And it was a straightforward school. It was called the Ponzi Ponce School of Karate. John De Leon was my sensei at that school. Now, I don't know if you remember the phrase Ponzi Ponce, but he was in Hawaii 5-0, I believe, that early show.
Okay.
And he opened in the valley, San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, opened a school. And so I liked, my cousin and I joined together, and we would learn, basic punches and kicks. Like many kids start with Taekwondo,
Hmm.
the basic disciplines, and learn kiais and all that. And it's good for kids, kind of empowering. But later, I got more serious, and I got involved during my high school time when I was in overlap with gymnastics training. I took Okinawate, which is Okinawan style karate.
Okay.
It balances between the linear and the circular forms of China and the linear forms of Japan. And it's quite an interesting form. I learned the 108 move, falling leaf form, and a number of katas. And I got actually pretty decent, fast kicks and snaps and punches. But again, I personally, some people love sparring. I
Hmm.
didn't like sparring. I like doing katas, forms. It kind of was a natural segue into doing floor exercise where you do these routines
Right.
over and over and try to perfect them. So I like the performance aspect and perfecting the movements. So anyway, I was bullied, as I said, and I remember a move my father taught me. You can probably picture it. This kid, this bully, grabbed me outside the gym in a headlock, and he held me in this headlock. I was bent over, and he was kind of bent over. And he said, you give up, I'm going to punch you. And my father had shown me a move for that one situation.
Hmm.
It was odd. I slipped my leg around and behind both of his legs. You can imagine that
Yep.
while we're bent over. And then I stood up quickly and threw my arms out to the side. And I was shocked. He went down. It
Nice.
actually worked. And he came up cursing, but he stayed away from me, thinking maybe I knew something, that might hurt him, as most bullies do. They look for
Yep.
easy prey. That was a kind of a high point. And from there, I went on. Actually, I had a good 10-year, decades-long break from martial arts because I was studying gymnastics and trampoline. I sometimes joke I got a 7th degree black belt on the trampoline. So I was getting, developing my body, developing strength and balance and flexibility and all that through gymnastics. And only when I started coaching at Stanford University, in actually way back when,
Hmm.
1968 to 72, after I graduated from UC Berkeley, my gymnastics career was effectively over, but I began to coach and focus on my team, including the top U.S. Olympian I trained. But I saw, I had this interest. One day I heard a knock on the door in my office in the old pavilion there at Stanford, and I opened it, and there was a little, in his robes, a little Zen Roshi, a Zen master, and he asked if his group could come in 3 times a week in the mornings, early mornings, about 6 a.m., and meditate on our floor exercise mat. And I said, sure, and especially if I can join you. And he said, oh, you're most welcome. So
Nice.
I began a Zazen practice then, and that led to an interest in Aikido. And so there was a fellow named Robert Nadeau who focused a lot on energy work. He was an Uchigeshi with Ueshiba, O-sensei, in Japan right after the war. So they trained, with floors that had nails sticking out of them.
Mhm.
And it was a tough school back then. Then things got softer, as they often do in different martial arts as they evolve. They get a little softer, more open to more people who aren't as rigorous, perhaps. And so I trained for a while and ended up eventually being awarded a black belt certificate in Aikido. And later I studied Tai Chi. I learned the 108 move long form on both sides. I'm kind of a symmetry freak that
Wow.
way. And then later in my life, I studied some basic elements of Kali, Eskrima, Arnis, the Filipino arts,
Okay.
but only the basic elements. I don't want to claim any expertise in that area, but enough to be able to train people in a personal development or personal growth training I call the Peaceful Warrior Courage Training.
Okay.
This was after my book had come out and people gravitated toward what I was saying. And so I taught for 14 years, about 4 times a year at residential training, using knife fighting, basic moves of knife fighting, and a pretty pressure-filled, stressful test, graduation ceremony at the end, where some people passed the test, some people failed the test, and those who failed learned twice as much as those who passed about their approach to living. Because martial arts for me was always a way, a path to personal development. And this is not anything revelatory.
Mhm.
I'm sure anybody who's trained in the martial arts knows that it's character building like sport. But it seems to me, Brian, that what makes martial arts special is in sports. And yes, many martial arts have been turned into sports so they
Yes.
could compete in the Olympics and so on. But
Mhm.
at their inception, martial arts were, first of all, a kind of meditation or preparation for meditation, like the various Chinese martial arts, to keep the body flexible, so they could sit stably. But also, they are a lineage of life and death. The martial arts were taught where, if you got in a battle, you very well might not come out of it. And so there's a certain sincerity, a depth to martial arts, where sports, if you miss a shot in tennis, you can lose a match, you can lose a point. But in martial arts, there's that cell level memory that you can also lose your life.
Right.
And there are certain warrior sports, such as gymnastics, where a moment's inattention can mean a broken neck. So certain sport, but tennis doesn't really have that. Golf, for the most part, doesn't have that aspect.
Yeah.
Wonderful sports. But in martial arts, there's always an undercurrent of the sincerity. It's also, of course, about relationship. You're in a relationship with that person, your partner. Without them, what can you do? You can just do katas. You can just spar in the air and do shadow boxing, right?
Mhm.
So that's what makes the martial arts special for me and different from sports.
Okay. Obviously, in your high school and college years, you got heavily into the competition with gymnastics and trampoline and everything else. Did you ever get into the competition side of martial arts? I know you said you weren't really a fan of sparring, but did you ever compete in kata or anything?
No, that's a good question.
Okay.
And I never did.
Wow.
I probably didn't stick with one martial art. Some people, I have many friends, one 7th degree black, 7th dan in Taekwondo. And he did some very impressive things during his 7th dan test, apparently, from what I hear. But some people take one martial art in depth. They stick with it for decades. And what they gain in depth, they may or may not achieve in breadth. Whereas my approach, and that's just what was destined for me, it wasn't like some strategy or insight on my part, but I was drawn to one martial art to experience that, another to experience that, another to experience that. And I saw the different kinds of benefits, pros and cons of each art relative to others. And So that gave me some perspective on the different arts. I actually wrote an article for Black Belt Magazine. If somebody is able to look that up online, if they're curious,
Okay.
they can look up Dan Millman Black Belt Magazine. It was probably around 2006, way back when. And I just wrote about my experiences and perspectives, what I'm sharing with you now.
Okay.
So I did not compete. And in fact, I didn't really compete in gymnastics. I know that sounds kind of crazy since
Yeah.
I was a national and world champion. But to me, gymnastics was always a performance art. You either hit your routine or you don't. How well can you do it? Just like doing katas in martial arts. How beautifully can it be? How flowing? And so it was always a creative endeavor and a performance art. So I made eye contact with the audience. I acknowledged them. And the numbers, it's like gymnastics was shoehorned into making numbers and scores so they could compete as a sport.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing against competition, but I
Okay.
do have a problem with competitive mind because competitive mind pits one person, one nation, one group against another.
Right.
And when I play, let's say I'm playing tennis, I view that person across the net not as my opponent or adversary. I view them as my student and my teacher because without them, I can't improve. They're going to show me my weak points. And that's how I also view when I did martial arts. They were, even though I wasn't really clued in at that point, way back when, but now I view them as my teachers, everyone that I might spar with. Everyone I might quote unquote compete against in gymnastics. It's not like boxing where
Yeah.
you're up there definitely competing. There's a winner, loser, and so on. In tennis, that's true as well. In a track and field, you're racing against someone to try to cross the line in front of them. So that's clear competition. But one can approach competition without the competitive mind. They can approach it with respect and courtesy to other people, knowing that you can't control how well they do. That's beyond your control, but you can control what you do. And in fact, one of the principles that I often communicate to people in my seminars and so on is that we can control our efforts, but we cannot control the outcomes. We can't control whether we sink a putt every time or make a basket or win a match. But we can control a good effort. And by making a good effort, we vastly increase the odds of getting our desired result over not making the effort. Was it Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky who said, you make 0% of the shots you don't take?
As Gretzky. Everyone credits it to Jordan, but it was Gretzky.
Yeah. I figured it was.
Yeah.
One of those guys. It's always hard to attribute quotes.
Well, they were both pretty amazing in what they did. So.
Yes, they certainly were. Yeah.
Nice.
So I know I've been going on, but I'm just outpouring to share with you and your audience some perspectives. And we can get to the final martial art maybe a little bit later, but it's one of the most interesting ones I've ever come across.
Okay, cool. Well, one question I kind of had is that during your gymnastics career, or what parts of your martial arts training do you think helped you with your gymnastics career?
Well, I think it was Muhammad Ali who said in training, he said, skill is important, but not as important as will. In other words, will is more important than skill. And I think that martial spirit was a real help because I tended to, my coach used to say, for not really caring about competition, Dan, you're one of the best competitors I've ever seen because I tended to come through under pressure because I'd already dealt with sparring, with individuals and I was familiar with that warrior spirit. I probably should, for those people out there who have read Way of the Peaceful Warrior or seen the movie based loosely on the book or read any of my other books, people, I get asked all the time, even though something you could intuitively understand, is how can you be peaceful and a warrior? What does a peaceful warrior mean? And the way this came about is I was an assistant professor at Oberlin College in Ohio, and I was going to teach a course based on my background in Aikido and in Tai Chi. Half the course would be Aikido and half would be Tai Chi to give people an exposure to these two more internal martial arts. And naturally in the catalog, I was going to call it the way or the path, of the warrior. But then I said, no, that doesn't quite fit because these are more receptive arts. They're not really aggressive arts. And So I said, then a light bulb went on. I said, oh, why don't I call the course Way of the Peaceful Warrior? And that's the first time I coined that term.
Okay.
And when I wrote the book, I didn't know what to call it. It was about a lot of things I'd learned studying with various mentors well over a decade at that time. And I figured I'd call the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And again, people ask me, and I acknowledge that there are people who are true warriors who put themselves in harm's way: police, military, special forces, security guards at times.
Mm-hmm.
So, they are true warriors, but not all of them have a peaceful heart. And they're also very peaceful people. Maybe they wear all white, they wear beads, they do yoga, they're very nourishing and loving and supportive, but not many of those necessarily have a warrior spirit. So what peaceful warrior means, it really describes all of us. It's an approach to living, not just fighting. It's about, everybody I've seen is striving to live with a more peaceful heart in the midst of the chaos of everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Even while sparring, learning to relax and move and breathe while sparring. So we're all striving to live with a peaceful heart, a sense of serenity, equanimity. But at the same time, there are moments in our lives where we need a warrior's spirit. And again, it's not necessarily about fighting, except maybe with those inner demons of fear, of insecurity, regrets, and so on, dealing with that inner conflict. But really, it means rolling up our sleeves and marching into life and tackling daily life, facing it squarely. And that, I think, is one of the lessons of the martial arts that I took with me into the sport of gymnastics, which, again, I emphasize, has a degree of warriorship about it,
Right.
because of the intensity of that particular form of training.
You mentioned the book. I'm curious, in your opinion, because like I said, a lot of my guests and we'll get to it towards the end of the interview, but one of the questions I ask all my guests is your favorite martial arts book. And a handful of my guests have mentioned that book specifically. What do you think specifically about that book appeals to martial artists? Because it's not really a martial arts book, but a lot of martial artists seem to really love that book.
I think it's the spirit. I think it's the big picture, because I think we're all looking for that. Especially people who have advanced black belts, they've learned the skills, they've gotten the speed, and maybe they can get a little faster over time or a little more skillful. But at some point they go, fine, I can do the skills. What is this really about? For example, Aikidoists, they learn to get out of the way and do their moves really well and smoothly and beautifully. But they go, well, yeah, now what? What is this teaching me about life? And I used to say that to, this is why people like the Karate Kid,
Mm-hmm.
because Mr. Miyagi could say, karate like life, Daniel-san,
Yep.
And we want to know, how does this relate to my life? I used to say, any teacher in school, and the teachers we knew when we were back in school taking, whether it's chemistry, history, any student should be able to say to their teacher, that's fine, but what does this have to do with my life? If the teacher can't answer that question, they don't really understand the big picture of how, but those who can answer it,
Mm-hmm.
they can really inspire young people in learning. And the same is true in martial arts. Yes, you can get the skills down, but what about the spirit? What about how does it help you in everyday life,
Mm-hmm.
doing everyday things, in relationships with people, for example? And you and I know that very skilled martial artists are often some of the most peaceable, kind, gentle people out on the street.
Yes.
They don't have that much to prove anymore. It's the beginners who are insecure that need to show their toughness,
Yep.
the macho stuff. So I think that's how martial arts really informed my gymnastics, and in a sense, vice versa, in terms of learning to concentrate, learning about the moment of truth when everything is on the line. So look, let me just say a brief thing, just a
Mm-hmm.
martial arts kind of an analogy. When I was 18 years old, a freshman in college, struggling actually academically until I learned some study skills. I never had to study hard, but I learned to do that and ended up with a pretty good grade average. But I was struggling with that, but I still was invited to compete in London for the World Championships. It was the first World Championships, and not wanting to spend extra money, with a minimum budget. They sent me, I actually arrived in London from California. So we're talking 8 hours difference.
Mm-hmm.
So 8 hours of jet lag. Yes, I was 18 and sturdy, but I got there at midnight and my luggage hadn't arrived yet. So I had to wait for the next plane, 1 a.m. I got my luggage. I got a taxi to the hotel, got to bed by around 2, and had to get up at about 7 because the competition started at 8 a.m.
Wow.
The warm-ups in Royal Albert Hall in London. And so I had very little sleep. I was jet lagged out. I didn't know what time it was. It felt like the middle of the night. I walked into the gym and saw Wayne Miller, a great trampolinist, bouncing higher than I'd ever jumped, doing a move I'd never done in my life. So I wasn't filled full of confidence. Then there was Gary Irwin, a really handsome, blonde diver type, beautiful form. He was the NCAA champion. Wayne was the USA champion at the time. And I was this freshman kid. They both had their coaches there. They'd both been there for 2 days, getting used to the time zones. So I had no reason really to be an optimist, but I did my routines. We went through a number of competing with various people. It was like a tennis tournament, the buys. So you work with one person, then you go to the next category and so on. And it ended up Gary Irwin and myself. And Gary played it safe. He did a routine that was beautiful, clean. Then it was my turn. And I got up and I started bouncing. And I said, I know I have to pull out all the stops. And I went through the first 2 moves, which I did well. Then I completely forgot what I was going to be doing. My mind went blank. I had no idea what was next, but I just kept jumping. And I did one move and then another hard one, then another move and another. And I hoped I'd come out on 10 bounces. I ended, took a nice straight bounce, landed, and looked up and they told me I'd won.
Wow.
And that was partly because of the martial arts training I had done. There's a Japanese psychiatrist named Shoma Morita once said, when running up a hill, it's okay to quit as many times as you want, as long as your feet keep moving.
Nice.
And so for me, it was just keep jumping, don't stop. Go for it. It's like thinking through the board when you're doing board breaking. You have to think through it, not to it, right?
Yep, correct.
So same kind of thing. I had learned that doing martial arts, and it really helped me, I believe. Looking back, and I've never been asked that before, but I think it's the first time I really can credit my earlier martial arts training with my attitude in gymnastics.
That's cool. So I know you mentioned the book a little bit. I'm curious, how did the whole writing thing start for you? Where did the interest in writing come from, and kind of what led to your very first book?
Well, Brian, like many of your listeners, I was really into self-improvement. I wanted to learn martial arts. I wanted to learn juggling, ventriloquism, magic, sleight of hand. I did speed reading. I did memory courses. I was really into self-improvement. But then one day it struck me that no matter how much I improved myself, only one person benefited. But if somehow I could reach out to other people, that would make my life even more meaningful. And I didn't really know at the time how I was going to do that. I was teaching gymnastics, and in a way I was teaching elements of life and how we can approach life through gymnastics. So I started coaching, but I didn't really grasp the bigger picture at that time. After studying with 2, let's call them mentors, my latest book, my 18th book, after 40 years of writing, I wrote a book called Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit. And it's the true story of my spiritual quest. And that explains really the background. People who just read the book think, oh, Dan studied with this old guy in a gas station, and then now he teaches. But it was actually 20 years, 2 decades of intensive study with 4 major heavy-hitting mentors.
Okay.
But I'd only studied with the first 2, but that created in me content, ideas I wanted to share, and that's what started developing over a 7-year period into the book that became Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And no, it wasn't about martial arts, though there was an element of that. Socrates, he did some neat Aikido moves to defeat some thugs who had attacked us in the story. But no, it was really the warrior spirit, though, was reflected, I believe, in the book. And again, the connection to life that many martial arts I mean, many martial artists have read the book because they are seeking that. They wanted something more than turn this way, punch this way, block this, and then go and spar. They wanted something more than just the physical skills, the emotions, the mind, the spirit. And I think the book brought that up, that sense of inspiration in the readers.
Nice. I was just looking through your website. So a lot of stuff on here. What type of stuff and information can people find if they go to your website?
Peacefulwarrior.com has, for example, a link to a life purpose calculator, which is really fun. A lot of people, it gives a taste of some quantum leap in self-knowledge. By putting in your date of birth, it gives you a kind of a pattern that your life path involves. I know it sounds crazy, but it's my second best-selling book. It's been well over 2 million readers, maybe 3 by this time, have read that book, The Life You Were Born to Live. And I wish I'd known that about the gymnast I coached, I'll tell you, because different people have different strengths and hurdles to overcome, very different ones. So you can't coach everyone the same way. If you understand someone very well, you can get through to them in ways that, for some people, it's about process, being patient, learning one step at a time. We've all heard the story about the young beginner in karate who says to his sensei, how long will it take me to get a black belt? It's his first day of class. And the teacher says, I don't know, maybe 5 years. He says, 5 years? What if I tried twice as hard? He says, 10 years at least.
Yep.
So some people need to learn patience. Others, they're dealing with insecurity and a need to prove themselves and a resultant tension and competitiveness. And others have various other issues, strengths and liabilities. So the life purpose calculator gives a quick taste, and one can go into more depth, but that's all at the website. It has my books. It has some online courses. There's a meditation on life and death. There's also a 4-minute workout. That's a great warm-up for the day. I've been doing it for probably 40 years, 40 years now, every single day. It's part of my morning routine. I'm 78 years old now, and I still, do weights and swimming and biking and walking actively many miles here in Brooklyn, New York. So point is, I do my best to walk the talk, as they say, and be a good example. In fact, was it Albert Schweitzer who said, in influencing other people, example is not the main thing. It's the only thing.
Nice.
I try to, otherwise I'd have no authority. I'd just be mouthing the words if I wasn't living according to, call it the warriors, the peaceful warriors ethos.
And I will definitely put a link out there for the website when the episode comes out for sure. So.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, that's fine. Everyone's welcome.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually just looking at the calculator myself, so I'll be checking that out when we're done here. It's kind of
enjoy.
Yeah, it looks cool. So now you'd mentioned a little earlier a current martial art you're studying. What is that style, and how did that come about?
Yes, there was a fellow named Al McGlucky. I don't know if you've heard of Al, but he did for about 35 years. He taught and practiced Pak Silat, and he's very, very good with the butterfly knife and with sticks and so on, Indonesian art. And one day Al called me and said, Dan, I just did a seminar with this guy named Vladimir Vasiliev. And he said, you got to check this guy out. I've never seen anything like it. Now, coming from Al, he had high credibility in my mind. So I checked it out. I ended up flying to Toronto, Canada from California, where their home school is. And it's a Russian martial art. And I know the Russian brand lately has been tarnished by politics and so on.
Right.
But it doesn't have any belts or special uniforms. There's no, you try this technique and I'll show you this thing to do in response to it. It's based on instinctive movement and certain fundamental principles of movement. It's called Sistema.
Oh,
have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, Vladimir Vasiliev, Vlad is the founder in North America of Sistema, though he trained with Mikhail Ryabko, who I also trained with in Moscow, and Vladimir. I went to Moscow. I trained with him there. We went to a Spetsnaz base. I trained at their summer camp in Toronto. Fascinating work. And it was really just the most interesting martial art that I've ever come across.
Yeah, I'm actually been trying to get Vladimir on the show, so I'm hoping to get an interview with him soon. That'd be kind of fun to chat with him.
If you can get him, and maybe even his wife Valerie could be involved. She translated for him for many years, but now he can speak well English.
Cool.
But yeah, if you can get Vlad, that would be a cool thing.
Yeah, I will definitely look into that. So this question I ask all my guests, I'm really, especially with you, with your background, with all the books you've written, in all your years and all your life, is there one philosophy you've learned that is at the top of your list?
Well, I don't think so. It's like saying, what is the best movie you've ever seen?
Exactly.
It's like, what genre,
Yep, I'm the same. Yep.
Best book. So, but something came to mind. If you ask the question in the form, what advice might you have for other people? One of the things that I've taken really closely to heart recently is it's so important, especially for young people, to stop comparing themselves to other people. Because when we compare ourselves to someone else, it's a profound disrespect for who we are, our own path and life. It's like when I was teaching gymnastics, I discovered that some people could learn a somersault, let's say, quicker than others. But often those who took longer to learned it better than those who learned it faster. So we need to respect our own way of learning, our own way of living, and not compare ourselves to our earlier self or to our imagined perfect self or to anybody else. And, kids get depressed. They compare themselves on social media to their friends who all seem to be having more fun than them. But that's not the reality of it. We all have our own battles. We're all stumbling toward the light.
Okay. I like that. That's a really good answer. I got like a few fun questions that we used to start wrapping up the interview.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on something like MMA and the UFC? Is that something you're a fan of? Do you watch it?
I do. I'm not a rabid fan.
Okay.
But for example, one of my good friends is David Meyer. David is the reigning world in his age group, which is 60 plus. He's the reigning world BJJ champion.
Nice.
And he studied with everybody. And another acquaintance of mine, Josh Waitskin. I don't know if you've ever had Josh on your
I've been
program.
trying to get. Yeah, I love the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. I've been trying
Me too.
I've sent him like 4 emails through his website. I would love to have Josh on my show.
Yeah, well, he's an acquaintance. I wouldn't call him a friend,
Yeah.
But he invited me to the school he co-owns with Marcelo Garcia in Manhattan. I saw him roll with Marcelo and other people. And yeah, he's an interesting guy because he won the World Push Hands Championship after being a chess master and then got into BJJ. But Dave knows everybody in the field, of course.
Yeah.
He's been around a long time. He's and also Yassine Saiwasser, who is the European MMA champion.
Okay.
Yassine's a terrific guy. And I know he'd be happy to be on your show.
Yeah.
Yassine. He speaks 7 languages, including English.
Wow. If you want to put him in touch with me, I'd love to chat with him.
Well, if you send me an email, just remind me,
okay.
And I'll see if I still have Josh's contact info. Maybe it's an inside. I don't know. It's been years since we've actually spoken. And David Meyer, I think, would be happy to be on your show too.
Okay.
He's very, very articulate, brilliant guy. He's the founder of Adopt-A-Pet, an international pet rescue society. He's plant-based, entirely plant-based diet.
Wow.
Vegan diet, and yet he's a world champion in BJJ.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so anyway,
good.
I don't know where we're going with that.
No, that's okay. I was just asking your thoughts on MMA, so I think we got a good answer there. So now this one, let's say now maybe you would never actually have done it yourself if MMA would have been popular when you were younger because you didn't like the competition side. But if you would have, what would your MMA walk-up song be? As you're walking into the cage, what song would be playing? This is a new one I just started asking, so kind of a fun one.
It's really a fun question, and I don't think I have an answer to it.
Oh, really?
No.
What song did you use for your floor exercise competition? Do you remember that?
Oh, well, men don't do floor extra music.
Oh, they don't? Okay.
No, men, it's silent. That's why maybe I don't relate to that.
Okay.
I mean, I love music, but I just don't. Obviously, there's the cliched ones like "Eye of the Tiger" or the Rocky theme, that kind of thing. That's always very stirring. Sometimes I teach shadowboxing in my seminars to awaken that warrior spirit in people.
Okay.
And I do it to "Running with the Night," Lionel Richie.
Nice.
So I like that as well. But I'm sure there are, and there's great music in the Karate Kid.
Oh yeah, You're the Best by Joe Esposito. I think that would be mine.
But there you go.
I love that song. But I'm a music guy too, because I started in radio when I was 15. So my answer would probably change every other day. I mean, I'd probably pick up something like, the Beatles or Elvis. Then I'd go into like 80s hip hop and rock, and who knows what I would do.
Well, you probably just know too much in that field.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Cool. Now, this one, it doesn't have to be 4 names. I've had people give as few as 2 names and as many as 8, but maybe 3, 4, 5 names that you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Oh gosh, if I were really immersed in the field, I could name drop a lot, but I only know certain people.
Yep.
And so I would definitely mention Vladimir Vasiliev.
Nice.
I would mention Jean LaBelle.
Nice. Very cool.
Dan Inosanto.
Nice.
Gosh, I have to kind of personally know about somebody more in depth to say that. So and of course I mentioned David Meyer to you.
Yeah.
He's extremely knowledgeable, and Yassine Sawasser, who I mentioned.
Hey.
And if I can give you their contact as well.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some good names. I've met Gene. I met Gene one time at a tournament in 1995. I have not met Dan yet, but Dan's actually going to be in Minnesota in June, and I'm hoping I can make it down that weekend to meet him. I've actually interviewed his daughter and his son-in-law on my show.
Oh, how nice!
Yeah,
I hear he's a great guy.
Yep, really, I've heard that. Everyone I've talked to that's met him said he's just one of the nicest guys you ever meet. So yeah.
And obviously, probably a lot of people mentioned Bruce Lee, but I didn't know Bruce Lee, and I knew Shannon, his daughter. We connected briefly after the Peaceful Warrior movie came out. She reached out because they were working on a movie as well.
That's cool.
But I never knew Bruce.
Yeah, I've interviewed a handful of people who knew him and trained him and worked with him. But obviously, I was born in 1974, so he died a year before I was born. But definitely grew up idolizing him.
He certainly inspired many people through Enter the Dragon and other movies. Yeah,
definitely. All right, how about a favorite martial arts book? And you can't say Way of the Peaceful Warrior.
Oh no, I wouldn't.
Oh, I know. I've had one or two guests try to pick their own, so I kind of got to throw that out there.
Well, I'm going to give you a couple because I just can't. Again, I'm not good at picking one.
That's okay.
I really like the beautiful illustrations of Aikido and the Dynamic Sphere by Westbrook and Rotti, Ratti. Westbrook and Rotti, Aikido, but also, of course, Zen and the Art of Archery.
You're the second person who's mentioned that book. That's cool.
Yeah, Eugen Herrigel, Herrigel. There's some controversy around the factuality of that book, but I found it quite inspiring. And wow, I'm sure there's some other books, but they don't. Yeah. Oh, Aikido in Daily Life by Koichi Tohei.
Okay.
Aikido in Daily Life. Nice. Because he talked about applying ki and that positive spirit in everyday life. It was one of the first books I read that connected consciously, up front connected martial art with this is how you live this way, not just fight this way.
Cool. Yeah. I like it. I'll have to add those to my list. All right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Well, of course, I was totally inspired by the completely tacky Kung Fu.
Kung Fu, yeah.
Yeah, Ed Spielman is an acquaintance of mine. We've spoken by phone, and he wrote a wonderful book called The Mighty Atom, Atom.
Okay.
He was a personal friend of Joseph Greenstein, who was a strong man, and talk about a warrior spirit. The book came out later under the title The Spiritual Journeys of Joseph Greenstein. And the book's a rare book. It's hard to find now, but it is an amazing book. I read it to my daughters when they were little. So anyway, where was I going with that?
Talking about Kung Fu.
Oh, yeah, Kung Fu. Yep. Obviously, David Carradine, fine actor. I think he was perfect for the role, except he had no clue about how to actually do movie martial arts.
Exactly.
But he was a fine actor for that role. Yeah. So I only said it was tacky because of his lack. If you look back on YouTube and look at some of the fight scenes, but it captured a spirit. It really excited me about the idea of the peaceful warrior who was a Buddhist monk, didn't like to fight, pacifist, and yet he was called upon to defend himself or other people. To me, that was the ideal of the martial artist.
Yeah, I loved it as a kid too, and then like I said, as I got older and learn more about martial arts. I'm like, yeah, that really isn't as good as I thought it was. I mean, the philosophy and the lessons are all good, but yeah, the actual martial arts in it. Yeah,
no.
I know.
And of course you got Kato in the Green Lantern, played by Bruce Lee. And,
oh, yep, Green Horror. Yep,
and Enter the Dragon, which also has its moments.
Yeah,
very movie. Yeah, Bruce had mastered movie martial arts.
Yes, well, I'm excited. They announced they're redoing Kung Fu as a movie starring Donnie Yen. So they just announced that about a month or so ago, and I'm excited because I love Donnie Yen. I wasn't a fan of the remade TV series about 3 years ago, but I will definitely watch a movie with Donnie Yen in it. So
now, if we got into the Japanese movies like Samurai Trilogy, the story of Musashi Miyamoto with Toshiro Mifune, if we got into Yojimbo or Sanjuro,
yes.
These were classic films.
Yep.
They really captured the samurai spirit, at least.
Yeah.
And Chushigura, which is 47 Ronin.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have that on DVD. I love that movie.
Oh,
yeah.
Classic. Yeah.
See, and mine is always The Karate Kid, just because that's the movie that got me into martial arts.
I was about to mention Karate Kid, even though, again, it had its limitations. Ralph Macchio wasn't the martial artist, but I love the movie, the spirit, the music, and the lessons of Mr. Miyagi, tying it into life, right?
Yes, exactly. I watch it at least once a year. It's one of my all-time favorites. I'll take it out and watch it, and it's just fun, and I like it.
We're totally aligned.
Exactly. So have you watched the new series Warrior that Shannon Lee is the executive producer of?
No, I didn't know Shannon actually had executive produced that.
You might enjoy it. It's based. She created it.
Wait a minute. Is this guy a guy with a beard? It's a guy with a beard who it's back in history.
It takes place in San Francisco. It's in the Old West. With the railroad and stuff, and it's based on Bruce's original notes for the Kung Fu TV series. It's kind of what he thought it should have been when it was supposed to be made for him.
I'll take another look.
Yeah. They just dropped all 3 seasons on Netflix and are trying to get Netflix to give them a 4th season. So fingers crossed.
Well, good for Shannon.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's a good show. It's a good show. All right. Now, this one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen, a favorite movie fight scene? Is there just one fight scene that stands out?
Well, do you know, I'm going to mention, I'm just can't do the one thing, but I will do a couple.
No problem.
One of the first great fight scenes in karate, in Okinawa actually, was from the original Manchurian Candidate.
Oh, okay.
Not the one with Denzel Washington, which was great too.
Yeah.
But with Frank Sinatra and, I forget who else. But, Laurence Olivier played a tragic figure. But there was a really good, it was one of the earlier fight scenes. One of the first ones is, I don't know whether it was Yankee Doodle Dandy, but James Cagney had studied judo. And it was one of the first U.S. movies ever to show an Eastern martial art.
Okay.
Doing some judo. But I guess one of my favorite fight scenes was from The Princess Bride, the sword fight scene.
You're the second person to mention that one, actually. That is cool.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you said that.
And of course, there are others. There are so many good fight scenes. There's one called Warrior. Nick Nolte played an alcoholic father of 2
Tom Hardy was in it.
Tom Hardy, yep. That was some good stuff. And, you can't discount great boxing movies either, like Rocky.
Rocky gets picked, not as often as I thought it would, but Rocky has definitely been mentioned.
Yeah. Ali.
Yeah.
Boxing is certainly a top martial art. So
I like. I'm a big, and not many people have heard of this one, but I'm a big fan of the 1992 boxing movie called Gladiator. Brian Dennehy was in it. James Marshall, Cuba Gooding Jr. Kind of flew under the radar. It's one of only 2 movies in my life I went to at the movie theater 4 nights in a row. That's how much I liked it.
Wow. Yeah. Gladiator, and it's what year?
I'm pretty sure it was 92. Yeah, because it was my senior year of high school or my freshman year of college, so it was 92. But yeah, Brian Dennehy is in it, and Cuba Gooding Jr. before he was either right before or right after A Few Good Men came out. Because he was in that one and stuff, and but it's a good movie. And James Marshall, was also in a few.
Oh, I'll check it out.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of it, so I will check it out.
I know. I always do as a joke when like coworkers are talking about best movies of all time, and they start talking about Gladiator, and of course they're talking about the Russell Crowe one. I'm like, oh yeah, Brian Dennehy, the boxing movie. They're like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking about? I overheard a lady saying when after Gladiator came out with Russell Crowe, she said, well, it was a good movie, but it was so violent. And I want to say to her, duh, it's called Gladiator.
Nice.
But, yeah. But that's it's fun kicking these ideas, these things around. But I'm going to check out Gladiator 1992 or thereabouts.
Yeah. And I have one final question, just because
sure.
I'm a kid of the 80s. I'm a huge movie buff, and maybe you've never seen it, but I'm just curious, as a former like world champion gymnast, what were your thoughts on the movie American Anthem? Did you ever watch that one with Mitch Gaylord and Wayne Gretzky's wife? Was in it?
Yes. I didn't. Well, quick story. When I grew up in my little neighborhood, when I was like 10, 12, 14 years old, 15, there was some girls lived across the street. One was named Rusty, and one was named Michelle. And Michelle turned into, years later, Mama Michelle of the Mamas and the Papas.
Really? Michelle Phillips?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, Michelle Phillips. Yeah,
wow.
She grew up across the street from us. They used to come to our pool and swim. We had a little pool in the backyard back in the early 60s. And John came and Demi too, but Cass couldn't make it that day when they came to swim. But anyway, she played Mitch Gaylord's mother in that movie.
That's right. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I thought Mitch did a creditable job.
Yeah.
He was like a James Dean type, morose character a little bit. And I thought it was a pretty decent movie. Whereas Kurt Thomas, who was one of the greatest gymnasts in history, made probably the worst movie ever made, worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space. It was called Gymkata.
Yep.
It was embarrassing.
It was horrible.
Horrible. Everything was wrong with it. But I thought Mitch did a good job in American Anthem.
Yeah, that is cool. I actually my daughter, I have a teenage daughter, all three of my kids. My youngest is a 17-year-old, and all my kids love 80s movies, 90s movies. So we always go back and watch all those. And I watched American Anthem with my daughter last year, and she enjoyed it. So,
that's great.
Yeah, it's always fun like that. But before I let you go, any like last minute parting words, anything I forgot to ask you about? I know you got probably supper coming up soon, but I just want to give you a last chance. Anything else you want to get out there quick?
No, I feel like I've been. I just hope I haven't waxed on too long in a monologue. But it was from in love and enthusiasm of the martial arts and the appreciation for the background that has brought. So no, I feel pretty completed here in terms of what I might say on the subject.
Nice. Well, I tell all my guests the listeners want to hear you more than me, so never feel like you're talking too much. So I think you did a great job. I enjoyed it a lot, and I can't wait to get this episode out for people to hear.
Oh, well, that's terrific. Well, I've really enjoyed my time with you, and thanks for your persistence in reaching out.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.